so much for being here for the last talk of the day. Today I'll be really trying to cover one or two take-home messages, and I want to start just briefly talking about why I think digital mental health and neurogaming in particular is important, not just in the broad field of health, but in mental health in particular. Talk a little bit about that, and then I want to spend a good bit of time on really thinking about how to take the best from the current digital ecosystem and neurogaming, and to develop these health tech and mental health tools that we're working on, and to avoid the pitfalls of all sorts of problems that are plaguing us right now, such as growing awareness of things like possible smartphone addiction, the attention surveillance economy, and the fact that a lot of our digital tools have been designed not with kind of well-being and living a humane life in mind, but the bottom line in mind, and what that means as we're trying to create health tech tools in this context. And then I'll spend some time trying to illustrate some of these ideas, using as an example the stress reduction and anxiety reduction app I've developed and am currently testing, called Personal Zen. And again, focusing on not only maybe some principles of what humane health tech might look like, but why we are in dire need of a focus on that, not just from scientists and researchers like me, but from the industry as well. So why digital mental health in particular? I just want to throw, if you're not already aware of some of these stats, I want to raise awareness a little bit about really the profound burden of mental illness in our society. Something you may not know is that in our lifetime, in the United States alone, over 160 million of us, that's about 50% of the population, will have a clinical diagnosis of a mental health disorder. And then there's the rest of us who will just be struggling, perhaps anxious, perhaps stressed, perhaps having moments of depression. So if you don't yourself in your lifetime struggle with mental illness, you will surely know and have a loved one who will. When we think about the roots of these mental health struggles, we know that 1 in every 4 to 5 youth meet criteria for a mental disorder with severe impairment, and giving rising rates of suicide, of depression, and anxiety in our culture among the youth. This is a very important statistic to keep in mind, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Another thing to remember is the typical age of onset for anxiety and stress-related disorders in particular, which is an area of my research focus, is school age and early adolescence. So these are not problems that begin in adulthood. These are problems that begin in some cases, very young kids and youth. And this is also a time when kids, I think, are most open to neurogaming approaches, to digital health, and other kinds of tools like that. I won't spend long putting this in kind of economic perspectives, but The Economist about 5 or 6 years ago had a whole special section on the cost in numbers, in dollars and cents, and pounds, in the case of The Economist, of the mental health crisis. The burden of mental illness is greater than any other single disease category. That means greater than heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. Out of the $148 billion spent annually in the US on behavioral and mental health treatment, $42 billion alone is just on stress and anxiety disorders, which are also, that's important to keep in mind, because the stress and anxiety disorders dovetail with a lot of physical ailments, worsening or exacerbating things like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, et cetera. The costs of mental illness over the next decade worldwide are $16 trillion. So not only, of course, are we most concerned with human suffering, but the sheer magnitude of the financial burden on societies across the world is also staggering. But you might be surprised to further hear that this is the tip of the iceberg, because those stats are based on people who actually seek treatment or we've identified as having mental illness. 50% of people don't seek treatment. And why don't they? We have an unbelievable array of treatment barriers that we, and as a psychologist, I am part of this problem that we in psychology and psychiatry have set up. And these are burdens of cost, time, and stigma. Sorry, that might be a little tricky to see, but this is a national survey of U.S. People in the U.S. listing why they don't seek mental health treatment, even though they feel the need for it. 48% of untreated patients cite price as a barrier. We know that not only is it expensive, difficult, and time-consuming to seek mental health treatment, but we know that about 90 million Americans live in what are federally designated mental health professional shortage areas. What that essentially means is that about 90 million Americans are more than 4 or 5 hours away from a qualified mental health professional. So they just simply can't access treatment on that level. And of course, we also have to remember that stigma, the stigma of mental illness, is among the biggest barriers to seeking care. So, given that, and those of us in this room perhaps who are doing work in digital mental health and neurogaming, we know the incredible crisis that we're facing in terms of mental health problems, and we know the incredible opportunity that digital tools might provide in terms of taking qualitative leaps and increasing accessibility, acceptability, and affordability. So as we, over the past decade, especially since the birth of the iPhone about a decade ago when all of this became so much more radically mobile, we often have these very positive, warm feelings about mental health technology, and everyone's like, yes, this is the future, and we're going to do it, and we're just going to make it a game, and it's going to work for everyone. And now, of course, we've been used to thinking about tech in this way. Now we're thinking about tech in this way. We're thinking about all the things that, the ways that tech play roles in our life that are not really about promoting wellness and our sense of humanity and connection, but instead add to our burden of stress and distress and exhaustion and isolation in some cases. The great irony of social media is that sometimes people end up feeling even more isolated than before. So what I want to talk about now is what we need to think about and how, as a field, we need to wake up and realize that we are developing these tools, whether it's neurogaming, health tech, digital mental health, in an era of techlash. And we have to acknowledge both the suspicion that is out there for good, for rightfully or wrongfully, as well as some of the realities of what the digital ecosystem are right now, and develop tools that respond directly to those challenges. So I know everyone in this room has been acutely aware and has witnessed the growing tech backlash over the past year or two in particular, and whether that's the issue of mobile phone addiction, data security, the spread of fake news, unethical business practices, you name it. People have started to be very angry and suspicious of the Silicon Valley powers that be. And we're starting to question how digital tech affects our daily lives and our well-being, trying to also remember all the great things about digital tech, but it's a little hard to remember at this moment in time. Now, at the same time, as I noted before, we're seeing a rise in distress across the board, mental health challenges, particularly in our young folks. I'll go over this quickly, but there's good epidemiological data to suggest that we have a doubling of suicide rates in the past 10 years. The American College Health Association has documented a 5-year increase in undergraduates reporting overwhelming anxiety from 2011 at 50% to just a couple years ago at 62%. And in 1985, the Higher Education Research Institute at UCLA found that about 18% of incoming freshmen felt overwhelmed by all I had to do. And from 2010 to now, just a couple years ago, 2016, we're at 41% of incoming freshmen feel overwhelmed. Now, in 2017, researchers, we are usually a circumspect bunch. We don't just make broad claims without a lot of data behind it. But people started getting a little worried about these trends, these correlational trends. And they went so far as to suggest that with the birth of the iPhone about a decade or so ago, with the rise in suicide rates, anxiety, and depression, that there might be, because there might be a correlation of those things happening at the same time, that maybe smartphones have destroyed a generation. And you guys might remember that article that was circulating out in the Atlantic that made that claim, and there have been some academic papers published making the same claim. Now, a systematic review showed that excessive and compulsive smartphone use does correlate with anxiety, stress, and depression. That was just conducted about a year ago. And there have been a few studies suggesting that using, let's take Facebook as an example, because that's where some of the research studies have focused, that using more Facebook over time predicts more negative mood, less reduction in depression symptoms after treatment, and lower well-being in a longitudinal study. But as a scientist, I have to say, I'm far from thinking that the evidence is in. I think that if we're going to blame the machines and blame technology for everything, we're really missing the boat. And I think perhaps this audience in this conference today that sees a lot of the promise of neurogaming and games for change would agree with me. At the same time, I think we do have to think about where we do fit in with either blaming the machines and thinking about either the great potential that digital technology and neurogaming has for healing, but also that there could likely be some potential for harm as well. So, for example, right now, I think there's been, if you guys are aware of some of the organizations out there, such as what it used to be called Time Well Spent. What's the new organization? Do you guys know about this? Time Well Spent? Yeah, that's, what is it called now? It's the Center for Humane Technology, I think is actually what it's called. There's been a lot of talk about the inhumane design that a lot of digital tech, particularly mobile tech, has. We know that we are well ensconced in an attention and surveillance economy, where our every click and swipe and everything we look at is our data is the business model. And so that means that the more that we're on devices and the more that there is our addictive properties to the devices we use, that the more money that these companies make. So, and that focus on creating devices that we never want to put down, of course, was never really designed with our well-being in mind. And so we have to contend with the fact that that is the digital ecosystem that we're creating these health tech tools within. And so how do we account for that? How do we acknowledge that more screen time in many cases leaves us feeling more depleted, less connected, more exhausted because of the slot machine logic that these devices have been designed around? We also know that while it's really great to escape into a game or an app sometimes, or just to connect with others, we know that in our life sometimes we escape and we disconnect from the present with devices. And if that becomes a rigid habit, if that becomes addictive, then we know that that can have negative health effects and certainly negative effects on well-being. And we know that when we think about the developing brain, and as a psychologist and a neuroscience researcher, I think a lot about that with teens in particular. During childhood and the teenage years, we're learning how to be social beings, and we're learning face-to-face what it takes to handle an emotional life and a social life. Does mediating our social lives on smartphones have any negative impact on that basic social neurodevelopment? We don't know. So we have to think about all of those factors as we're creating health tech in this current ecosystem. So if the evidence is still coming in, and we don't want to blame the machines, but we also want to have our eyes wide open, what do we do to make sure that the health tech we create and the neurogaming tools we create are healing rather than harmful? So I have a few ideas about that, and then I want to illustrate some of these ideas with the app that I've developed and have been doing research on called Personal Zen. So I think the key that I think about is quite a simple key, and that's that we need to really capitalize on what digital and mobile technology in particular affords us while minimizing screen time. So let's not have digital health tech, let's not have neurogaming try to be the be-all and end-all and solve every problem. Let's actually let's do what it really does best. And what does it do for us best? So in the sense of taking the best from health tech. First, of course, it's highly accessible. We can all download interesting apps and games on our devices and on our computers. We can have online communities. We can create tools that are much more engaging in many cases. We can also start to contribute to the destigmatization of mental health problems. Because if we all have a tool on our device, if we're all trying to reduce stress, and we do it in gamified ways, all of a sudden it seems less scary, less debilitating to be struggling with mental health. We can also capitalize on the fact that we all use our phones briefly. We sometimes use it in 2, 3, 4, 5 minute spurts. Why shouldn't we create micro interventions that work with the way that the device is optimized to be used? We also use things on the go, obviously. And so why not focus more on creating health tech interventions that can be used on the go but still have demonstrated efficacy? And then, of course, with the AI craze that's going on, and as a psychologist, I actually know we were doing computational modeling about 50 or 60 years ago, which is, that machine learning is the basis for AI, and cognitive psychologists did that a long time ago. But there are amazing opportunities now because of the sheer magnitude of the data that we have available for machine learning to be anchored in. And so now we have the opportunity to make more adaptive and personalized treatment approaches on the go, in the moment, as people are using these tools. So I think those are ways in which we can really take what the devices afford us without having them be everything, try to solve every problem for us. And then the last principle that I think we need to take into account, and one that I've been really kind of interested to see people talking about here, is the importance of evidence-based. And about, I would say 5, 6, 7 years ago, everyone had a stress reduction app, and everyone had something was for anxiety, and everyone was like, yes, we're going to do it, and there's going to be a game, and kids are going to use it, and they're not going to be anxious anymore. And then all of a sudden, nothing was working, because then people thought, well, maybe I should test it out a little bit. Yeah, CBT is great, but I'm going to put it in a game, and it's going to work. And then you realize, well, wait, it doesn't work the same way in this environment. So as we started testing things out and they weren't working, we realized how crucially important it is to get a strong evidence base. And so how do we do that? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the app I've developed, Personal Zen, which is one approach to taking a strong evidence base and embedding it in a gamified format. And in this case, it's a mobile app. So this app I developed, I've been developing it over the past 5 or 6 years. We're actually in the middle of a huge update, which will make it much better. As a scientist, I've relied upon the kindness of designer strangers, not strangers, but that was a Gone with the Wind reference, which totally didn't work, excuse me. But I learned very early on that I can't do this. I have no idea how to create something engaging or fun. I'm a psychologist. That's about as bad as it gets in terms of boring. So I tried to partner with wonderful game designers and wonderful builders and developers. And so we've gone through about 4 or 5 iterations of Personal Zen, and we're in the middle of a big one now. And I can't show you that now. In about 2 months, I'll be able to. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the core mechanic that we built into Personal Zen, show you some pretty pictures. Those are some of our new assets right up there of the new Personal Zen. Right now, there's a free version for iOS only on the App Store, and you can get a feel, and I'll show you a little video of it. But this app was developed. Again, it's a stress and anxiety reduction app. It embeds something called attention bias modification training into this more engaging format. And to explain what attention biases are and why we want to modify them, I'm going to do a little experiment with you. It'll take about 30 seconds. Please look at the screen. Keep looking. Looking. Okay. Who saw the angry face? Okay. Who didn't see the angry face? Okay. So there it is. It's kind of disgust, anger. It's hard because they're bald, and so the results of this experiment. Well, decades of research have told us that people who are usually in the moment or over time more stressed and anxious more rapidly, intensely detect negative information like angry and disgusted faces. And not only are you faster and more intensely detecting this information, but sometimes you get stuck on it so that you can't process other information around it. Now, this preference to pay attention to the negative is called the threat bias, right? So it's a bias towards threat and negativity. But here's the kicker. The threat bias actually piggybacks on one of the triumphs of evolution, which is that we can quickly and efficiently detect danger in the environment. And what does that do? It allows us to trigger our fight-flight response and deal with the danger effectively. But this threat bias hijacks and skews this evolutionary advantage, and it actually starts to act as an unconscious information filter. So you create an imbalance, a skewing, so that we pay too much attention. We actually prefer and prioritize threat at the expense of the positive. And if this threat bias becomes rigid and we lose flexibility, we start to look at the world through this rigid filter, and it puts our fight-flight response on a hair trigger. It skyrockets our feeling of stress and anxiety, and we start to see monsters in the closet, even when they're not there. So what Personal Zen attempts to do, and I'll show you a little bit in just a second about how it does this, it actually is designed to retrain. It's a brain training technique. It retrains our attention to more flexibly disengage from the negative, and you have the opportunity then to focus more on positive information all around us. So now we're creating an information filter that favors the positive. So I've published 3 clinical trials placebo-controlled trials comparing Personal Zen to a placebo version of the app. And we've recently focused on testing Personal Zen in health groups that can really benefit from lowering barriers and increasing accessibility and on-the-go use, which are stressed and anxious pregnant women, which is almost every pregnant woman if you have been or know a pregnant woman. So these are, and of course, stress and anxiety during pregnancy has important health implications, not only for the woman, but for the developing fetus. So we had expectant moms play Personal Zen for just 5 or 10 minutes a day, about 3 or 4 days a week. And they did this for a month. And then we brought them into the lab. We'd already done a baseline assessment about a month prior. And then we, over the course, that time 1, 2, and 3 on the x-axis there, that was over the course of about a 3-hour lab visit. We stressed these ladies, not too much, but we stressed them a bit. We needed to get their stress response up because we measured salivary cortisol. That's the stress hormone. And what we found is that when you compare the ABMT group, that's the attention bias modification, to the PT, the placebo group, the active group, the group that played Personal Zen for a month on their own, on the go, showed a reduced stress response over the course of 3 hours compared to the placebo group. So now we have a biological marker that this app may actually be helping build stress resilience in this important health group. I want to quickly show you just what the app in its current form looks like. This is a very simple. It's more like digital worry beads, really. I don't want to call it a game, especially at this conference and in this room. It's an exercise. It's a relaxation exercise. And the trick is that you can see there's a pleasant sprite and a sort of angry, unpleasant sprite. And these sprites are presented simultaneously. And they're presented only for half a second. And it has to be half a second, because that's what 2 decades of science has shown repeatedly. And what that does when it's a half a second is it creates a conundrum for your brain. The brain quickly, it's still superliminal. You can see it, but kind of barely. But your brain knows those 2 conflicting sources of information are there. They're faces, so we're wired to detect those automatically because we're social beings. And so your brain has to resolve, oh, there's negative and positive information. What do I do? And then you'll see how the training part of it, which is excessively simple, is simply creating a response demand in the place where the happy sprite, the pleasant guy is. And you'll just trace that little path. So there's only a path following the pleasant sprite. And the pleasant sprite will there, and the sprite is switching around. So literally it's this simple. And so by having to trace that path following the happy sprite, your brain is learning that you need to disengage from the negative and find that positive to quickly respond. It seems like it shouldn't work. I keep on, honestly, I keep on being pleasantly surprised that there's something about this core mechanic, this healing mechanic, that helps folks reduce stress and anxiety. And the reason that we started with a very simple intervention approach, an active ingredient like attention bias modification, is that it's so simple that it can be embedded in multiple contexts. That through its simplicity, you can elaborate on it, put it in, I don't know, Fortnite, for example, and maybe it will still work. Now that needs to be tested, but that's the potential of starting very small and scientifically evidence-based, and then building up from that very focused evidence base to develop tools that really might work from the standpoint of scientific evidence. Okay. So just to wind up too, so as tech developers, as researchers, as designers, I think we need to move forward. In this era of Techlash, it's been a welcome wake-up call, and I think what we need to do is to, as we move forward, take into account at least 5 principles of what it means to create humane health tech. And I'm just going to outline some of the 5 that I think about and that I've learned from developing and doing research on Personal Zen. So the first one is that we need to, with these tools, fit into people's lives. And that means we have to think not about being the new cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a gold standard treatment for a lot of mental health disorders, and it's complex and it's time consuming and it's expensive, and not just to gamify or digitize cognitive behavioral therapy, but actually let's start with what, again, works with the affordances of digital and mobile tech, which is that it should be brief, it should be seamless, it should be something that rather than go, rather than try to spend all of our energy developing standalone treatments that are digital or gamified, let's focus on ones that maybe are preventative, that are targeted, that are boutique, right? And that's a larger, in terms of let's put our resources there. Let's start small, really do good evidence-based research on it, see if it works, and then grow into maybe developing treatment that's a gateway treatment. I think of that almost like a gateway drug. It leads you to other treatments. Well, for a lot of people struggling with mental illness, they don't want to go to the shrink. They need a gateway treatment that's not as stigmatizing, that can fit into their lives. So instead of CBT digitized, let's create more gateway treatments. And I kind of think of Personal Zen as one of those. Let's create more adjunctive treatments, right, that can complement existing mental health treatments that we know have good efficacy. And I think standalone, that spectrum of care, that needs to be where we devote the fewest resources in terms of developing these techniques and tools. So there's fit into life, the spectrum of care, and then of course, this is the great thing about especially mobile health tech. We have high accessibility, so make it affordable, decrease stigma, so make it fun, make it sparkly, make it magical. Why not? Mental health is magical. Why shouldn't you have unicorns to reduce depression, for example? And think about how we can decrease stigma through social connection as well, and using all the amazing social media tools we have at our exposure to do, it's available to do that. I think we need to create tools that are engaging, but we have to get eyeballs off the screen. Maybe it's fine to be on screens for 5, 6, 7 hours a day. I know I feel crappy afterwards. I started an experiment where I actually, instead of being on my device on the subway, I'm a New Yorker, I write poetry. I have to tell you, I've been doing this just for the month. The poetry, I don't know. Don't hold me to the quality of the poetry, but my mind is working anecdotally in a way that feels much freer, much less bound by the cult of efficiency than it is when I just have to get work done on the subway. So we have to experiment with that as people who want to promote health. Get eyeballs off the screen. Less is more. Again, I think we need to focus on micro interventions. Let's put our energy there instead of making these 4-month CBT, healthcare packages. Let's really focus on what we can do with a mobile device, which are micro interventions. Let's do it briefly, 3 to 5 minutes a day. That was the active dosage for Personal Zen in the study with pregnant women. Maybe we can do that. And also make these tools, sometimes you want people to just be in a space and be focused, but maybe there could be efficacy on the go as well. We have to explore that in a much more aggressive way. As I referred to briefly before, we have to, I have mixed feelings about the AI revolution and whether or not it's going to pan out at all. But there's no doubt that machine learning can reveal new insights, and so we have to use those tools for more adaptive and personalized approaches. When we test out some of these digital health tools, we say, oh, we have to test if it works. It's not going to work for everyone. How do we understand for whom it works best, and how do we boost efficacy? One thing I'm doing now is I'm actually combining the mobile app with TDCS, which is transcranial current direct stimulation, which is, if you're a gamer, you might know, it's those little, you get to zap your prefrontal cortex and stay up all night and play games, right? Well, what if we could create super responders to health tech apps by using the same kind of technology? We're testing that out in my lab right now. And then connecting mind and body. This is the double-edged sword of digital tech. We have amazing ways of tracking our physiological state. At the same time, when we're absorbed in devices, we get disconnected from our body. So we have to understand that there is a double-edged sword, and when we develop health tech, we have to walk that line and really find out how to best connect mind and body using the technology we have. As an aside, just a really brief note, just thinking about the digital ecosystem in absence of the entire ecosystem we're living in and the society we're living in is like spitting in the wind. So I think we do have to remember stats like this. The fiscal year 2018 Substance Abuse and Mental Health Science Administration, the SAMHSA budget was $3.9 billion. That's a reduction of $399 million from the prior year. Whereas the 2018 defense budget, $700 billion exceeded the budget cap that was previously established, that you could not go above $549 billion for defense, but they exceeded it. And there was some, I heard an interview with a general. He said, yeah, we have like $1 million a day or $1 billion a day to spend. That's what it would be, $1 billion a day. And we just don't know what to do with it half the time. So we have to know that that's the ecosystem we're in, but we can still move the dial because there are amazing grassroots and public funding initiatives happening, and we have to keep on putting our energy into that. But I just want to make the plea that I think it's time, with an incredible promise, which I've been a bit of a negative Nelly talking about some of the risks of the digital ecosystem. I want to say there's incredible promise, but we have to double down on what it means to promote humanity and well-being rather than the bottom line of Silicon Valley companies. So keep digital health humane, and thank you very much. I want to acknowledge my funding, mostly from the NIH, as well as the City University of New York, and my amazing research team at the Emotion Regulation Lab, which is housed at Hunter College at the City University of New York, and my amazing, just received her PhD, Dr. Sarah Myreski, and my ABD, all but dissertation doctoral student, Samantha D'Onofrio, who are just amazing partners in this work. Thank you very much.